At 3:11 in the morning, a backhoe idled in my driveway like a dragon with heartburn, its bucket hovering inches from the cedar shake roof I had just spent 6 months restoring by hand. The hydraulic hiss and diesel rumble shook my windows. I stumbled outside in my pajamas and slippers to find a woman in a visor and pearls, clipboard glued to her hip like a badge of authority, screaming over the engine noise. "You have 48 hours or we flatten this pioneer hovel," she shouted, jabbing her pen toward my cabin with each word. The demolition operator, a tired-looking man in a safety vest, just shrugged at me as if midnight demolition was a normal HOA amenity, like a splash pad or seasonal wreath policing. My neighbors' lights were clicking on one by one, faces appearing in windows. I stood there in my pajamas, trying to process what was happening while my quiet suburban life crumbled around me. The backhoe's engine idled like a threat, its yellow paint gleaming under the streetlights. My name is Owen Wrath. I am 38 years old, work in data analysis from home, and I mind my business. I collect old maps, say no worries even when there are worries, and prefer quiet weekends to drama. The cabin, built in 1869 by a pioneer family named Blackwell, sat at the edge of our development in Sycamore Glenn, a suburb that tried to look like a Hallmark card but smelled faintly of chlorine and gossip. I had bought the property at a tax auction 18 months ago for a fraction of what it was worth. The county had seized it for unpaid taxes from an estate dispute. Most people saw a rotting eyesore. I saw history. I spent a full year restoring it by hand, working evenings and weekends. Hand-split cedar shakes that I learned to make from YouTube videos and a 70-year-old craftsman named Dale. Lime wash I mixed myself from historical recipes. Old square head nails I bought from architectural salvage yards 3 states away. Every shingle, every board, every window was historically accurate. I even tracked down the original glass-making technique for the wavy panes. I poured my heart, my savings, and my sanity into that place. The cabin was small, maybe 800 square feet, but it had good bones and a story. Enter our HOA president, Sandra Withers. Mid-50s, tennis visor perpetually attached to her head like a growth, pearls that clicked when she walked, and a whistle she wore on a lanyard that she actually used to get people's attention. She had been HOA president for 7 years, running unopposed because everyone was too afraid to challenge her. She had a taste for bylaws the way some people like hot sauce, slathering them on everything. From the moment I moved in and started the restoration, she had it out for me. I think she saw my cabin as a personal insult to her vision of suburban perfection, which involved beige siding, identical mailboxes, and absolutely zero personality. Sandra's campaign against me escalated with the grace of a raccoon in roller skates. It started small. Unauthorized rustic aesthetic, she wrote in a violation notice taped to my door, citing bylaw section 7-12-F. I checked the HOA bylaws. Twice. There was no section 7-12-F. It did not exist. When I pointed this out at a board meeting, she said I was being argumentative and fined me $50 for disrupting proceedings. 2 weeks later, she fined me for non-conforming fence height. I did not have a fence. I had a small split rail border around my herb garden, maybe 18 inches tall. She measured it with a novelty yardstick shaped like a giraffe that she claimed was calibrated. The giraffe said my fence violated the 48-inch minimum. I am not making this up. She also insisted the rails were treated lumber, which was prohibited. They were cedar. I showed her the receipts. She squinted at them and said receipts could be forged. One morning at dawn, I was making coffee when I looked out my kitchen window and saw Sandra crouched in my herb garden like a detective at a crime scene. She was photographing my thyme plants with a tablet and muttering the word invasive under her breath. When I went outside to ask what she was doing, she stood up sharply and said she had received complaints about non-native aggressive vegetation. My thyme was from the garden center 4 miles away. It said made in Oregon on the little plastic tag. She wrote me up anyway for failure to maintain approved landscaping. Then the anonymous flyers started. Local man operates frontier cosplay attraction. They read in bold Comic Sans font. Expect bonfires and goats. Possible health code violations. I did not have goats. I did not want goats. I definitely was not operating an attraction. But the flyers kept appearing in mailboxes throughout the neighborhood. Mrs. Chen from 2 doors down asked me if I was going to start charging admission. I assured her I was not. Then Sandra invited me to an emergency board meeting in the clubhouse. The board, which was just Sandra and 2 people who clearly owed her favors, voted unanimously that my cabin was an attractive nuisance. She pronounced the phrase like she had just invented it, with a smugness that made my teeth hurt. I tried to explain the historical significance of the property, but she cut me off with a sharp blast of her whistle. "This is not negotiable," she said with an icy tone that could freeze helium. "Your little log cabin fantasy ends now." The letter arrived on a Tuesday, certified mail. 48 hours to demolish or HOA will, for safety. Official action required. Sandra had stamped it with an official-looking seal she had clearly bought online. It had an eagle and everything. But she did not stop there. Oh no. Sandra was just getting warmed up. She called code enforcement 3 times in 2 days, each time pretending to be me. On the 3rd call, she claimed I had found black mold in quantities biblical. Those were her exact words, according to the recording I later obtained through a public records request. She also told them I had mentioned structural collapse and possible rodent infestation. None of this was true. When code enforcement did not take the bait and actually sent an inspector who found absolutely nothing wrong, Sandra pivoted. She hired a demolition company using HOA funds, convincing the board it was for emergency removal of a dangerous structure. She prepaid them $4,000. Then she filed a dangerous structure complaint with the county. Except, and this is important, she filed it with the Parks and Recreation Department instead of code enforcement. She also attached a photo that was clearly not my cabin. I recognized it from a History Channel documentary I had watched about frontier cabins in Montana. Wrong state. Wrong century. Wrong everything. The bonus twist came when, in her Christian zeal for order as she called it in a neighborhood email, she trespassed onto my property at night to spray a neon orange X on my hand-hewn front door. The door I had spent 3 weeks restoring, matching the original milk paint color from a sample I found under 6 layers of newer paint. She used spray paint. Bright safety orange. And she cut the line to my security camera. What she did not know was that I had a second camera. My quiet life was now evidence, all time-stamped and backed up to the cloud. I am not a confrontational person by nature. I analyze data for a living. I like spreadsheets and evidence. So I did what I do best. I researched. I drove to the county archives on my lunch break and met with a librarian named Margaret who wore cardigans in summer and weaponized passive aggression like an art form. I explained my situation. She adjusted her glasses and said, "Let me see what we have." Margaret disappeared into the back for 20 minutes and returned with a cart loaded with deed books, maps, and file folders tied with string. Together, we pulled the original property deed from 1868, land patents, tax records, and finally, the big one, the State Historic Registry listing. Turns out, my cabin had been placed on the state register 5 years ago, long before I bought it. A local elementary school had taken a field trip there when it was still abandoned. A 4th grader with good eyes found a hidden signature carved into the wooden lintel above the door. J. Blackwell, 1872. The Historical Society investigated and determined the cabin was one of only 3 surviving original settler structures in the county. It was protected. Legally protected. Sandra had just threatened to demolish a state historic site. Margaret made copies of everything. She put them in a folder and wrote on it in neat handwriting, "Evidence for Mr. Wrath versus Tyrant." I liked Margaret. I filed for an emergency injunction that afternoon with a lawyer who specialized in property rights and took my case on contingency because, and I quote, "This is the most clear-cut thing I have seen in 15 years. Then I called the State Historic Preservation Office. The woman who answered listened to my story and said, "Hold please," in a tone that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. By dusk, my driveway looked like a crime scene. A preservation officer with a badge and a serious expression. A county sheriff who looked like he had seen too many petty tyrants and was out of patience. And one very spooked backhoe driver who kept saying he was just contracted for a job and did not know about any of this. The preservation officer examined the cabin, consulted her tablet, and confirmed it was registered. The sheriff looked at Sandra's fake seal, the one with the eagle, and then looked at Sandra with the weariness of a man who had definitely seen this before. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "you do not get to invent government. That is not how any of this works." The emergency injunction landed at 6:47 p.m. like gospel. The backhoe backed out of my driveway, beeping reverently, its driver shaking his head. The investigation that followed blossomed like dandelions in spring, fast and everywhere at once. The State Historic Preservation Office does not mess around. They sent investigators. They filed reports. They contacted the State Attorney General's office. Meanwhile, the HOA hired a forensic accountant to review the books because several board members suddenly got very nervous about where their money had gone. The accountant, a CPA named Gerald who collected ceramic frogs and took his job very seriously, worked through the weekend. Gerald's report was 17 pages long. Sandra had used HOA funds to prepay the demolition company $4,000. She had ordered 500 customized unsafe structure stickers from an online print shop for $180. She had purchased 3 different rubber stamps with official-looking seals. And, my personal favorite detail, she had bought a ceremonial gavel made of walnut with a brass plate engraved with the words Wrath of Withers. That cost her $93 plus shipping. Gerald highlighted that one in yellow and added a handwritten note in the margin. Seriously ? The State Attorney General's office took an interest because threatening a state-protected historic structure is not a cute hobby. It is actually a felony under state preservation law. They sent a very polite letter to Sandra asking her to come in for an interview. She declined. They sent a less polite letter. She hired a lawyer. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 7 p.m. Word had spread. The clubhouse was packed with every homeowner who had ever received a violation notice, been fined for a mailbox infraction, or just wanted to watch Sandra go down in flames. It was standing room only. The air was thick and sweaty and electric with anticipation. People brought popcorn. I am not joking. I arrived early and set up my laptop. I had bodycam footage from the sheriff's visit, time-stamped security footage of Sandra spray painting my door and cutting my camera line, and copies of all the fraudulent documents. Sandra walked in at 6:58 wearing her visor and pearls, carrying her Wrath of Withers gavel like a scepter. She saw the crowd and her face twitched. This was not the usual gathering of 6 bored neighbors. I displayed bodycam footage from the sheriff's visit, showing Sandra cutting my security camera line while complaining about rogue pioneer vibes. The room hissed. People who had been afraid of Sandra for years suddenly found their voices. The sheriff walked in mid-agenda and served her papers. Sandra tried to gavel the subpoena away. The gavel broke in half. It was, in every way, chef's kiss karmic justice. Sandra Withers was removed from the board immediately, fined $23,000 for misuse of HOA funds, ordered to reimburse the association in full, and sentenced to 200 hours of community service cataloging historic artifacts at the county museum. The judge, a woman with zero patience for nonsense, specified that Sandra would work under the direct supervision of the Cardigan librarian who had helped me. Sandra's face turned the color of a stop sign. "But wait," she sputtered, her voice cracking with desperation. The judge cut her off. "There is no but wait," she said coldly. "You targeted a protected historic site with fraudulent documents and misappropriated funds. You are fortunate this is a civil matter and not criminal charges." Sandra sank into her chair, her visor slipping down over her eyes, pearls clicking against the defendant's table. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of her world collapsing.